All right, discussion. Disability Voting Rights Week in partnership with RevUp. Madeline, before you take the mic, I've got some stuff that I got from RevUp that I figured I could go over real quick, and then we could get into the specifics of your info. Did you know 62% of people with disabilities voted in 2020, which is up from 56% in 2016. I thought this was an interesting stat because it's higher than I thought it would be, which makes me happy. But we got to keep the number going up, and that includes, knowing your rights as a disabled voter, knowing how to get to the polls, all of that. That's something we'll be covering. All right. Know your general rights on election day. And this information is from the ACLU. The polls close while you're still in line. Stay in line. You have the right to vote. So basically, if you are in the line when it hits 7 p.m., it does not matter that it's 7 p.m. That's technically closing. You are in line. They have to let you in. Like, Madeline could probably explain that a little more clear than that, but don't leave the line once it hits 7 p.m. If you make a mistake on your ballot, ask for a new one. If the machines are down at your polling place, ask for a paper ballot. And there are some specifics about disability voting on the next slide. 2, know your voting rights as a disabled person. And this is also from the ACLU. Under federal law, all polling places for federal elections must be fully accessible to older adults and voters with disabilities. Every polling place must have at least one voting system that allows voters with disabilities to vote privately and independently. And Madeline, this is actually a question that I don't know. If a voting place were to be inaccessible, would the voter protection line be somewhere that could be called?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They are required by federal law to have at least one polling machine that is accessible to all disabilities. And most electronic ones are, and you can change the accessibility settings when you get there, which I'll explain, I'll go into that. But yeah, if you go into a polling place, which you will not find in Statesboro, we're very good as a city about doing that. But if you're voting elsewhere, don't let anybody tell you that that's not a thing, because it is per the ADA. So always remember your rights when you're at the polls.
And I can share the voter protection line when I'm going to do a big old post, and I'll include the voter protection line for y'all. All right, Georgia specifics. This is where Madeline comes in, and I'll stop sharing my screen. We're going to go over some registration, Georgia My Voter page, absentee ballot specifics, and some info on your sample ballot. So let's see. Stop share. All right, I made you co-host, so Madeline, you should be good to screen share.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna share.
Jack, do you want to come up here to be able to see it?
Okay, can y'all see my screen?
Yes.
You can? Okay. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do, I have this. Okay, so this is my link tree. If you guys go to any of my social media, you will find a link to the link tree. If you can't find it on social media, you can also Google my name, and it's on the second page of Google, like halfway down, which is really weird for me to say because I don't like that. But anyway, here we are. So this is all just a link tree. When you get down to the campaign, which is like halfway down, all of this stuff is in order of how you would do it normally. So the first thing you have is register to vote. So we're going to click on that. So it'll bring you to this page, which is Georgia specific My Voter page. And this is where everything happens. So if you think that you've been registered before, like maybe you were in high school, you got your driver's license, whatever, like you agreed to be a kidney donor or an organ donor, and you wanted to be registered to vote. If you're a male and you registered for the draft, you're probably registered to vote. You can click on, am I registered to vote? And it will bring up this page where you log in just with your first initial, last name, the county that you're in, and these are all Georgia counties, so Bullock's just in the B section, and then your date of birth, and then you can click submit, and if you're not registered, it won't let you log in, and then you'll click the register button down here, and it'll bring you back to this page, and you click I want to register to vote. So there are 2 ways to register to vote. You can either register to vote by mail, by printing and mailing an application, Or if you have a driver's license or an ID card, I have an ID card because I don't drive, but I still, have a government issued ID. So I still have a number. You can click here and do it all online. This is also how you can change your voter information online. So you would just go through this process and change your information. You can also do that with mail-in. So if you guys don't want to do it online, if, for whatever reason, I will be on campus every single Wednesday between now and election day with these printed mail-in applications, which you can drop into the drop box at Landy. And I know there's a UPS box like on your way to Sweetheart Circle from Landy as well. So you can do those two different options to register to vote. When you do register to vote, they will then register you online, and probably like a week later, you'll be able to log in online and see your voter information. And that will show you your sample ballot, your polling place, the address that you're registered with, just to make sure it's accurate, and all that. I'm not going to log in while I'm sharing the screen with you guys because I don't want the World Wide Web to know where I live. So we are going to avoid that. But if you guys have any questions about any of that, please let me know. We're going to go back to, so once you're all registered to vote, you'll get a voter card in the mail as well. They'll mail it to whatever address you registered on, and it's like a little postcard that just has your name and your address, and that's, your little precinct card. So once you're registered to vote, then you can vote, right? So you have two options to do, you actually have three options. One is showing up to the polls in person. Two is mail-in ballots for people who don't want to show up in person. And then absentee ballot voting is supposed to be for people who are like not here physically to be able to vote. So like service members, people who are citizens in other countries for whatever reason, right? So the majority of the disabled community, believe it or not, does mail-in ballots. And what's different about Georgia voter law today is that we have the signature match on our mail-in ballot applications. And why that's happened now is because, a lot of people voted by mail when COVID was going on, and it got really popular. And so our legislator decided they needed to regulate it more. So that's kind of why that's happening. So now you have to go online and you have to find a mail-in ballot. And this is the application. So if I printed this right now, I could put it in the mail. So you come on here and you make sure you read all these directions, because I know students do not read directions, so please do. You fill this out in black ink. You sign right here, okay? And what's so important about this signature is that this signature that you put on your mail-in ballot has to match the signature on your ID or your license. So if you got your license when you were 16, blah, 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 and you just scribbled your name, that scribble now has to match on this form. Okay, so that's why it's so important for the disabled community to acknowledge this, because there's a lot of accessibility barriers there with mobility and handwriting and being able to just write with a pen. For people like me and Jill, we're visually impaired. So me matching my signature to something that is on my ID is very challenging for me to do visually. And so that's, just one example, but that's why this is so important. If your signatures do not match and you mail this in, your vote will not get counted. So what's happening now is that you fill out this application for an absentee ballot, you mail it in, they make sure everything is matchy-match, right? And then you will get sent a ballot, and the same rules apply there. What's so important too that I want to mention about this absentee ballot application is that when you go online and apply for one, you will get sent one in the mail. If somebody else, say like a voter pack or somebody like RevUp Georgia or whatever, is doing some sort of campaign where they're, helping people apply, and they apply for you for a secondary absentee application, they can get fined up to $100,000. So when you do this by yourself, make sure that no one else is doing it for you again, just to, that's a thing. So if you guys are really involved in like political PACs or like the Young Democrats down here or whatever, just be mindful of that, that when you like, really, you should be the only person doing any of this paperwork. And you are allowed to have somebody fill out with you if, you know, that's needed for whatever reason. And so if that gets stuck in the mail, they send you a ballot. Same thing applies with the ballot. And that's where we're going to get into view your sample ballot. So why I put this on my link tree is that it's just a really accessible place to be able to find your sample ballot. The button on the Secretary of State website for like view your sample ballot doesn't always work. It's kind of weird. I think their like coding is wrong, but this is from a totally different, this is a nonprofit, Vote USA. Oh, Jesus Christ. But you can fill out this. Hello. And then we're going to look at my sample ballot. So here, and you can plug in any address. So like you can do your own, you can do your mom's, if somebody's curious and like, oh, I can tell you who your candidates are. This, like, you can plug in any address. So here we just have, and what I love about this website too is that you can compare candidates. So if you're not sure who to vote for, you've never heard of somebody on this ballot before, you can click their names and compare, you know, their policy and all kinds of stuff. So you'll get all the ballots, you'll get the Democrats, the Republicans, the Libertarians, and write-in ballots, write-in voter or write-in candidates. Sorry. And it gives you everything that's on your ballot down to your local elections. So these are all statewide candidates, senator, US representative, governor. Then we have all of the like attorney general and all the commissioners of everything. And then we get down to local. So this is your state representative for your district, your state senator for your district, and this isn't as local, but state superintendent, which will affect our public schools here. So it's kind of local, kind of not. But yeah, there's me. But yeah, so you can come on here and view your sample ballot anywhere. You can choose any website or any address. So if you know that you're going to be voting absentee, like somewhere like Atlanta, you can plug in your parents' address and look at the ballot there too. So yes, and we viewed our sample ballot. Then when it's time to vote and you do decide to go in person, and I've been telling my community this just because, and when I say my community, I mean like my friends that are disabled and the blind community, whenever I talk to them, is that this year in Georgia, it is going to be easier and more likely for your ballot to get counted if you can manage to go in person. And as like ableist as that is, and it is, that it is easier, but you're less likely to get your ballot rejected because of a signature not matching or the handwriting looking, whatever they want to say that your ballot doesn't, count. But if you physically show up to those polls, no one can argue with you. Like you were there to vote, your ballot is valid. Like someone looked at your ID, there's no argument there. So that's personally what I would recommend inside Statesboro. And early voting is going on inside the Russell Union. So if you're on campus, you will have a place on campus to go and vote. And I would strongly suggest taking that opportunity to do that.
Early voting is on October 25th, 26th, and 27th.
Yes.
And I'll be sending reminders because I know that's the most accessible option for myself personally to get to vote. So
yes, yeah, and we fought hard to get you guys that precinct, so please use it. But yeah, so you'll actually, when you hit find your precinct, it'll probably pop up, and your precinct, when you log in, and it'll bring you back to this page where you just log in, and your precinct will be right there, and with the address and everything. So you'll be set there, and you'll probably see the address for Georgia Southern if you're logging in like right before early voting. That's probably where they're going to tell you to go anyway. But now that we're on this topic of disabled voters, we're going to talk about your rights as a disabled voter. And what's really interesting, Jill, about your stats that you had earlier from RevUp is that we forget that the disabled community has grown a lot since 2016. With COVID and everything else, we are much larger in number than we were before, and we are now the largest minority group in the country. So we as a minority kind of carry the vote in that kind of mindset, which is really cool. So it's really important that we all vote. We have opportunity as a disabled community this year to really advocate for some serious policy change and funding in our state. We have multiple candidates with disabilities running in our state as House candidates. And you know, I'm not the only one. There's more than 2 of us now, which I've recently found out. So it's a big deal. So please, please, please make sure you guys vote. Most important thing that you will see here is the adaptive voting machines. So this is what Jill was asking about earlier. It is a federal law that each precinct has to have a voting system that is accessible. And these are the ways they are accessible. So seated voting, at least one touchscreen voting that will allow you to vote while sitting, right? There's all kinds of accessibility options for visual display. There is audio where you will hear things through headphones. You can use your own headphones, and then tactile interface. And that's here. So you basically get a keyboard essentially. But I would say, you know, this is federal law. So if you don't see this, call the voter protection hotline, which Jill already said she would share. But what's cool, and I didn't know this, is that you do not have to wait in line to vote as a person with a disability. Anyone over the age of 75 or someone who's disabled or requires assistance in voting may vote immediately at the next available voting compartment or booth without having to wait in line. And all you got to do is when you get there, go up to the poll worker who's sitting at the front table and say, "Hi, I'm a person with a disability. I would like to exercise my right to go to the front of the line." And that is all you need to say. And they should say, "Okay, no problem." And if they do not say, "Okay, no problem," they try to give you a hard time or tell you that's not allowed, you call the voter protection hotline and you say, "Hi, talk to somebody who knows the ADA." And that will get squared away. And why that's so important and why I'm saying poll workers is because this year, I mean, well, not all elections, but specifically recently, our poll workers have not really been well trained. I don't know who's in charge of training them. I don't know what department does that, but poll workers, like no matter who they are, Democrats, Republicans, independents alike, nobody at the polls knows what they're doing, and I don't know why. So it's really important for you to know your rights as a voter and not rely on other people to tell you what's right, because most of the time they probably don't know what they're talking about, especially when it comes to people with disabilities. So do not wait in line to vote. And you are allowed to have anyone help you vote. So if you are someone who, and you know, it doesn't have to be a physical disability. If you have like really bad anxiety and you need someone to be there with you, or PTSD or blah, 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 and you need someone to be there with you, you are allowed to have someone assist you. The only people it cannot be is your employer or the agent of your employer or your union, anyone whose name appears on the ballot as a candidate, which would be me, or a relation of the candidate. So your employer, agent of an employer, that cannot be one of your professors if you are a student who works on campus or any kind of job on campus. So that cannot be a professor or anybody from the university if you are considered an employee of the university. Okay, so keep that in mind. And then, you know, if you belong to a union, you would know. And then I cannot help you vote, so I'm sorry. And Jacob, my partner, cannot help you vote, I'm sorry. So anybody else is fair game. It doesn't have to be a relation to you. It can be a friend. It can be anybody who's not a coworker or an agent of your employer. So, you know, stay away from your job, anybody that you know from your job, you know, just to be safe. And then, you know, just don't ask me. So that's pretty much my, oh, and totally forgot, you can do curbside voting. Let's see, I read this yesterday. Maybe it's not on here, but I know there's a section of the ADA that talks about like if you can't get out of your car physically, you can do like curbside voting, and that's, you know, an ADA protected thing. Oh, the only thing, backtrack, kind of important detail, you have to show up to your polling place between 9:30 and 4:30 p.m. to not be required to wait in line. So the polls are open longer than that. They're open from 7 to 7, but you can only skip the line between 9:30 and 4:30. So Yes. And that's probably just because a lot of people go first thing in the morning and a lot of people go first, like kind of in the last 2 hours of a polling place being open. So I think that's probably to avoid hysteria about someone skipping the line, but which is ridiculous. But like Jill said, even if it gets past 7 p.m. and you're in line, do not leave the poll. If you are in line, you are allowed to vote, even if it's past 7. That's the most important thing. And again, I'm going to reiterate, stick up for yourself and your rights at the polls. Self-advocacy is the most important thing that a person with a disability can have in their tool belt to help them through life. If you cannot advocate for yourself, then you and I need to have a serious discussion. I'm just kidding, but like, it's a really important skill to have as a person with a disability. And that being said, those poll workers do not know you or your disability more than you do. If like, this is going to come up with people with invisible disabilities. Do not let a poll worker look at you and say, you're not disabled. Do not allow that to happen. You have a right, federal government, you have a right. So don't let anybody tell you you don't. But unless I'm missing anything, I think that's it, guys. That's all I had for you today. Does that, or I guess we can open the floor for questions. If anybody has any voting questions or how to do anything or are confused. I know that was a lot of information in like a very short amount of time. And all of this stuff, again, is on my link tree. If anything's confusing, please DM me, email me, ask Jill. Jill's my campaign manager, low-key, so she would know how to get in contact with me. But yeah, just let me know.
Yes, I plan, for y'all's reference, I plan to do basically a big old post with all this information that will be on SDAG's social media page. So that this is all just written down in one place for all of us. But yeah, that's a lot of new information, a lot of new good information mostly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I hate that voting is so complicated, and I'm sorry, but if I get elected, I will work within my power to change it.
We don't support SB 202 here. That's either.
Yeah, no, we do not support SB 202 in this room.
We do not.
Because voter suppression is bad. So
I'm gonna stop recording on that note.
I know.